Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming to this session. My name's Anna Dundas. I'm with Northeast Wilderness Trust, and I'm just here to introduce Mary Ann. So Mary Ann Furedi is the Ecological Assessment Manager and an ecologist with the Pennsylvania Natural Heritage Program at Western Pennsylvania Conservancy. She earned her PhD in biology from West Virginia University while studying the impacts of deer browsing on the demography of American ginseng. Her current work primarily focuses on characterizing the condition of plant communities and plant populations and monitoring changes over time. Her project encompasses both upland and wetland systems. And right after Mary Ann's presentation, we'll have a video presentation from the next presenter, and then we'll have a Q&A following that. So let's welcome Mary Ann.
Thank you. All right, well, thank you for joining me today. Let's just dive right into Pennsylvania forest. All right, so Pennsylvania forest, we have 17 million acres of forested land. That's about 58% of our land cover. Of that 58%, almost 40% is private, and then the rest that are somewhat public, 14% state-owned, almost 2.5% federal, and then 2% county or municipal. Out of our 17 million acres, though, we have less than 1% that's considered old growth. One might ask, like, oh, that doesn't seem like a whole lot. And to really begin to understand the perspective of Pennsylvania, we need to look at the history of the state. And really one of the defining activities that happened in Pennsylvania is the massive logging that occurred during the mid to late 1800s, early 1900s. At this time, it was basically driven by the Industrial Revolution. Charcoal was needed for the furnaces. Railroad ties were needed, and then also tannins for leather production. So because of the Industrial Revolution, that hunger for wood products was really met with Pennsylvania's forest. So after this massive and transformative logging, what was left was basically this denuded moonscape. I think this is a really great example of just how those forests were cut to nothing. They were described as basically stumps and ashes. This period in Pennsylvania's history is often called Pennsylvania's desert, and really this picture speaks to that. But out of those ashes rose the phoenix of conservation, and people like Rothrock and Pinchot understood that an activity like this could never happen again. So, they put these modern practices of forestry and conservation into place. All right, so given that this activity happened, it's actually really surprising that we even have 1% of our forests left. But we do know where a lot of our old growth forests are. One of our best examples is the Tionesta Natural Area. That's in the Allegheny National Forest in northwestern PA. That's about 4,000 acres. That's actually federally owned property. Other areas in the state are much smaller, about 100 acres, and they persisted because of several reasons. One being that they were basically in these really difficult areas to log. So you had really steep ravines or rocky ridge tops. So it's kind of interesting to think that the foresters during that logging time, when conditions were really quite dangerous, that these were the areas that they considered most difficult to log. So some of our areas are saved because of location. Others were protected because of either land ownership. You might have had wealthier families, that they had these forests as playgrounds, or there was like some sort of conservation minded need to keep these places. So Heart's Content and Jakey Hollow Natural Area are two really good examples. We also have a few other examples where it was really landowner dispute. Duttlinger Natural Area in Susquehannock State Forest, it's a really really cool area and a really nice hike. But the reason that was saved was it was a dispute between two logging companies over the boundaries. And I guess after a while, they just gave up. And that's why we still have that beautiful area. So in addition to a lot of these sites that we know already, we do look at those other forms of information, like our historical accounts. As a heritage program, we did a lot of county inventory reports. So there might have been some information about like, oh, hey, this was a really cool forest with big trees. So we were able to look at leads like that. I'll also point out that the Old Growth Network has been really active in Pennsylvania. So we've used a lot of their leads too to visit those sites. All right, so beginning in 2021 with funding from our DCNR, Department of Conservation of Natural Resources, Bureau of Forestry, we began an old growth project. So some of the main objectives of that project were to characterize these old growth areas, identify species that could be used as indicators of old growth, and then to take this information and think about what are best management practices and how can this information be used to help develop old growthiness in our secondary forest. So I had mentioned that Tie Nesta Natural Area is a big area, and that there's been a lot of research done there, but this more encompassing a project across the state was actually was the first of its kind. So that was pretty cool and novel. All right, so how did we characterize our old growth forest? We developed this rapid assessment methodology. I'm happy to talk about this afterwards. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but this assessment included several different levels of information that we gathered when we were out in the field. There was site level information, tree information that included species and DBHs, estimates and classification of downwoody materials, and then a series of metrics related to forest characters and conditions. We have all of this in like a nice Survey 123 form that can easily be done in the field. The challenge is always downloading Survey 123 forms. So we're still working on some of those. All right, so we were able to, over about a 3-year period, we were able to assess 39 sites. You see these little old growth trees represent where we visited in the state, and we had a pretty good sampling across the state. I have a breakdown here of where we sampled, but these are basically all on publicly accessible lands. Whenever you do sampling, it's always easy on publicly accessible lands, not only because we have good relationships with those landowners, but also thinking about things in terms of the future. Do we want these sites to be monitoring sites? If so, there's certainly a better chance of getting on these lands in the future than on private. Not that private isn't important, and that's something that we would like to look at more in the future, is just like how much private old growth is out there. I'll also add that we had a total of 39 sites, but 6 of these are considered second growth forest, and one of them is actually the oldest second growth forest, so maybe it's a young old growth forest. Depends on how you want to call it. All right, so our forest communities, here's a breakdown of what, as an ecologist and someone that works for the Pennsylvania Natural Heritage Program, we think about things a lot in community ecology. So these are our Pennsylvania types. What I'd like to point out here, though, is that the hemlock, white pine, northern hardwood, was our most commonly sampled, but hemlock is also a component in many of these other sites too. So I want you to remember just how important hemlock is. I also want to point out that I've got Norway spruce here. That was definitely one of those second growth. The reason we went to that site was because there were northern flying squirrels there, and northern flying squirrels are one of those old growth indicators, we were exploring that. So we went there, might as well, took a long hike to get there, we might as well do some sampling. All right, so as one would guess, we have old growth, we have large trees at our sites. Here's lots of hemlocks. We have about 1,000 photos of big old trees. So here's just a few examples. These ranged in size from the one with Noah and Claire right there. Those were about 86 centimeters, so that's about like 33 inches DBH. Jackie is looking at 110 centimeter hemlock, and I'm leaning against 119. So in this photo, we had ranging between like 33 inches to almost 50 inch. And then here's a few more pictures. That's David Yaney, who's going to be doing the next talk. And this is a picture of a big old beech, which for us, like, that's actually a pretty cool finding because really we had a lot of hemlocks. All right, so I'd like you to just notice on this box and whisker plot is that you see the outliers. Oops. Oh no. All right, we see I really went really far. All right, we see the outliers here. So we see that these forests had a lot of big trees, but I'd also like you to look at all of the small trees too. And really the take-home message here is that these forests have structure. You've got large trees, and then you've got scattered, smaller, younger trees. So you've got both a canopy and a subcanopy, and structure being one of those important features. Canopy gaps were also common. Some of them could be natural. Unfortunately, a lot of our hemlocks are being hit by hemlock woolly adelgid, so some of those gaps are due to die-off of those trees. We also noted a lot of variability across sites, is that the shrub layer and the herbaceous layer could go to being pretty dense in some sites and then depauperate in others. Regeneration was also highly variable. Here's an example of just some of the regeneration that we would see. Here we have a nursery log, and we see a little sweet birch there and some striped maple growing there. But one common observation was that many of the seedlings we were seeing really weren't representative of the canopy. So is our seedling layer really growing up forests that replace the same composition that they're in currently? We also had examples. There was a gap here in this hemlock stand, and you see dense hemlock regeneration, but it's to the point where it's way too dense. This isn't a healthy situation that we're seeing. All right, coarse woody material was a very common characteristic too. When I talk about coarse woody material, I mean both snags and downed wood. So here's just two examples of just like a standing dead hemlock, and how we would see a lot of hemlocks too is that hemlocks tend to lose their top either by wind throw or because of damage from hemlock woolly adelgid. With our decaying wood that we'd find on the ground, we would also put those into stage classes. So you see here's one that's partially decay, a stage 3. This would be a stage 4 where it's lost its bark but still maintaining its shape, and here's a totally decayed one. And then sometimes you see friends hanging out there. Can you see the rattlesnake? Things that you don't want to step on when you're looking at downed woody materials. But decaying wood was very common, and there were some areas where it's just all over the place. And we often saw many size classes, which is important too. All right, so we also had common threats throughout our site, and I had mentioned hemlock woolly adelgid being a big one. Here's an example of just a hemlock that's just coated in adelgid, and it's hitting our forest really, really hard. And the reason I pointed out earlier was that hemlock was such a strong component. This is affecting many of our sites. Also, beech-related diseases, beech bark disease, and most currently, beech leaf disease. Here's an example. I mean, it looks like the apocalypse has happened. So is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Time will tell, but I'd love to discuss that further. Another thing too is the legacy and continued impacts of browsing by deer. This was often an example of what you get from deer browsing, is they've eaten everything, and when you do have a canopy gap, it's replaced with hay-scented fern and very little regeneration. We also consider hay-scented fern one of those aggressive native species, and it's basically takes off because it doesn't have much competition. We did find invasive species from time to time, but it was mostly microstegium or barberry. And it was really if a site was more on an edge, like really our forest interiors look pretty good in terms of invasive species. And of course, climate change related, these changes in temperature, precipitation, and these wicked storm events are not helping our forests. So our best management practices is really trying to do our best to maintain the old growth forest we have. That means we need to continue and encourage treatment of hemlock woolly adelgid, expand that. Like our agencies hopefully are willing to put the time and people power and money into fighting hemlock woolly adelgid, because it's really the sites that we still consider good sites are because there's a lot of work being done. Continuing to encourage regeneration, that's really important, and kind of the regeneration in the direction we want it to be. Monitoring, of course, with everything. I'm a huge monitoring proponent. You don't know if there's a problem unless you're looking for it on the ground. And then really continuing to promote the value of old growth, the biodiversity, carbon storage. Our old growth forests are so important. All right, so the next steps here, I had mentioned that we were also looking at old growth indicators. So David's up next, he'll be talking about birds, but we have continued work looking at the mosses in these areas, the fungi, and also invertebrates. All of that stuff takes a lot of time. This winter, there'll be a lot of data analyses and report writing, and then in the spring, doing some workshops on that rapid assessment methodology I talked about. All right, and then it takes a whole crew to do this kind of work, so here's a shout out to everyone that's been helping me over the years. And then I could take a question later, or now, or, all right. Thank you.